The untold story of the kingdom of the Maharlikans, now called the Philippines. In the early 1930s, Europe was in a depression and Germany was financially bankrupt. An unknown party leader promised the German people that he could create jobs and boost its economy. The Germans dared him and put him in power. His name is Adolph Hitler. In June 1933, the Vatican and Hitler, a Roman Catholic, signed a concordat for mutual protection and enhancement. Shortly after that, Hitler was loaded with money. He built a massive army and manufactured weapons for war. Then Hitler took Poland. Before 1918, there was no Poland. That land was part of Germany and used as a buffer zone to separate Germany from Russia. But when Hitler reclaimed it, England declared war on Germany. Throughout the Spanish occupation of the Maharlika, members of the Tagean, Tallano clan have been visiting Europe since some of their relatives were English and Austrian. From 1866 to 1898, Prince Julian Macleod Tallano had also been frequenting the Vatican. In 1934, under Pope Pius XII, the Vatican negotiated with a member of the Filipino Royal Family, the Christian Tallano clan in Maharlika. An agreement was reached that 640,000 metric tons of the Tallano gold would be lent to the Pope. This was part of that gold accumulated by the Southeast Asian Srivijayan, Madjapahit Empire during its glorious reign of 900 years. In 1939, two members of the Tallano family and a Roman Catholic priest, Father José Antonio Diaz, brought the gold from Kota Kinabalu, Sabah, to the Vatican. After doing this, Father Diaz went back to the Maharlika and resided in Cabanatuan City. After World War II, he facilitated the safe return of the 640,000 metric tons of gold from the Vatican to the Maharlika. Manuel Acuna Roxas, a relative of the Acuna, Tagean, Tallano clan, then a congressman, and Bishop Enrique Sobrepena Sr. in the presence of Atty. Lorenzo Tanada, received the gold in Manila. A lease agreement was made between the Tallano clan and the Maharlika government. A total of 617,500 metric tons of gold was deposited in the newly installed Central Bank of the Maharlika to comply with its requirement for gold reserve. Under the terms of the contract, the central bank became the holder of that gold. That lease agreement will expire in the year 2005. Having gained the trust and confidence of Father Diaz, the Tallano clan made him the main negotiator and trustee of their gold. Father Diaz, in turn, hired the services of Addy Ferdinand E. Marcos, then a highly recommended brilliant young lawyer having attained notoriety when he successfully defended himself in the Nalundasan case in 1939. The Tallano clan paid commission to Father Diaz and Addy Marcos in gold, 30% from the principal of 640,000 metric tons. In 1949, the two richest men in the world were Father José Antonio Diaz and Addy Ferdinand E. Marcos. Between the two of them they legitimately earned and owned 192,000 metric tons of gold. Ferdinand Marcos withdrew their share of the gold from the central bank and minted it RP.CB. Sometime later, Father Diaz and Marcos brought their gold to Switzerland, in the Swiss Bank Corporation in Zurich. The remaining 400,000 metric tons of Tallano gold is in the third-floor basement of the Central Bank minting plant in East Avenue, Quezon City. There are 950,000 metric tons of gold, declared missing in the International Court of Justice, picked up by Yamashita from its European ally, Hitler. Another 250,000 tons of the Japanese loot around Southeast Asia are both now in the Maharlika. This country then became the holder of 1.6 million metric tons of gold bars. Some of the Yamashita gold buried in the Maharlika has been found. But the bulk of it is still buried to this day. And even now, thousands are secretly digging for it, including Japanese treasure hunters. The Wall Street Journal in its November 15, 1985 issue, wrote that 2/3 of all gold in the world is in the Maharlika. 1/3 is divided among the rest of the countries in the world. Very few Filipinos know this. When Marcos took over the government in 1965, the Maharlika had a foreign debt of $13.5 billion United States dollars. In 1986, when the Americans forcibly brought Marcos to Hawaii, President Aquino inherited a foreign debt of US $24 billion. But, of these, $7 billion United States dollars was incurred by the private sector. At his ouster, Marcos left $2.5 billion United States dollars in the central bank reserve. This means that Pres. Marcos during his 20 years of absolute rule only incurred a measly US $1 billion foreign debt to build up this nation with its fast-growing population and numerous infrastructure projects. How did President Marcos manage this government financially? Aside from the annual national budget of $35 billion financed by the National Treasury, he had all this gold at his disposal for building the infrastructure projects that today stand unequal to all four succeeding presidents. Today, this country has a foreign debt of around US $75 billion. From 1986 to 2000, the government under three presidents incurred a debt of US $51 billion on top of its original US $24 billion, in just 14 years. In the 1997 Philippine Yearbook National Statistics Office, a summary of government expenditures from 1966 to 1997 was made. From 1965 to 1986, 20 years, President Marcos spent $486,273 billion. From 1986 to 1991, 6 years, President Aquino spent $1,077,895 trillion. From 1992 to 1997, 6 years, President Ramos spent $2,237,907 trillion. Between May 14 to June 5, 2003, a nationwide survey report conducted and administered by Asia Pacific Periscope put out this question: among our presidents, who do you think had done most for the country? The results were: Marcos 41%, Magsaysay 15%, Aquino 6%, Ramos 6%, Estrada 4%, Arroyo 2%, Quezon 0.3%, Quirino 0.3% and 22% could not give any name. Margin of error was plus or minus 2.7%. When Father José Antonio Diaz, alias Severino Sta. Romana, died in 1974, all that 30% commission in gold became legendary Marcos Gold. After providing for his family in Marcos' letter of instruction, the whole wealth derived from this was supposed to be given to the Filipino people. This was the Marcos wealth that some politicians and churchmen kept on saying was the ILLGOTTEN, Marcos wealth that until today is in Marcos' secret accounts. On April 9, 1973, Marcos said, "My earthly goods have been placed in the custody and for the disposition of the Marcos Foundation dedicated to the welfare of the Filipino people."